Hi and welcome to my art studio. My name is Cameron McCool and I'm a classically trained visual artist in drawing, painting, and sculpture of the human figure and portraiture. And today I'd like to share with you some of my approaches to how I draw the figure from life. In this case it's going to be from a photograph from the MFA, and we'll be covering all the basics from body proportion to gesture drawing, rhythm, and working from simple to complex, intuitively to formally. And these are just a bunch of tools I hope you can add to your own arsenal and kind of add some more fluency to your artistic experience. For materials, I'm going to be using a variety of pencils and an eraser just so I can edit and undo at any time. And you can use any kind of paper you like, although I always recommend getting a sketchbook so you can kind of refer back to your notes and be it on proportion or concept you've written down, and also catalog your own artistic journey, which does help give you a bit more perspective on where you're growing and what you need to keep working on to get better and become more fluent. The piece I've chosen is by an Italian photographer, Gaudenzio Marconi, and he was an Italian living in Paris in the mid-1800s, and the work is an albumen print. And albumen is just that clear egg white that they used to prepare the paper for printing upon at the time. And he took a lot of academic nudes, which he would sell to the local schools, including École des Beaux-Arts, and the students would be able to use these whenever they couldn't afford models or if models weren't available at the time. And he also worked with my absolute favorite artist, Auguste Rodin, which I just didn't know until recently, so that's pretty cool. And the pose itself is a classical standing pose, so there's a lot of weight on one leg, which causes the hips to kind of bend down, and we'll see that weight interspersed throughout the body. And when the hips do this, the shoulders counterbalance in what's called Contrapposto, which I'll cover more in the lesson, but that's just an inherent counterbalancing nature found in organic forms. And when we investigate that, we're going to start to see this music that's bound to living creatures, and I think it can add some more music to your artwork and a bit more fluidity to how you engage the drawing experience. So as you might have guessed, I'm going to try to cover a lot in a short period of time, so please do pause or rewind and take this at your own pace. And without further ado, let's jump on in. I'm going to share with you my 7.5 head proportion method, and just ignore the ant on the right side of the screen. He's going to leave and do his own thing. So the easiest way to go about this is to draw a vertical line, and we're going to start with dividing it into 8, then remove the little half a head at the bottom. So divide that line into 2, then 2, and then 2, and continue doing this until you have 8 marks. And just take off half of a head from the bottom, and you can just erase the little part because we're not going to need that. Now at the very top, as you might have guessed, is the head, which just so happens to be one head's length, and I'm just drawing it as like an upside down egg just to mark the volume form that represents the head. Our first landmark down is the nipples, and that can change if they're breasts or the nipples are a little bit below that, but on a male it would be around there. Then the belly button, and then the crotch or the pubis or the bottom of the pelvis, and that's the top half of the figure. From the head, come down to the neck, and then the shoulders are about 2 heads wide, and it's about half a head in between the nipples and the chin to reach the corners of those shoulders. I'm just drawing in the pectoralis major, and then from behind that comes the rib cage, and just below the belly button we start to see the top of the hips, which leads us straight into the thighs. And the first mark below the pubis is about 2/3 down the front of the thighs. And between those next 2 marks kind of frames the kneecaps, so I just draw those right in the middle of those marks towards the bottom. Below the kneecap frame is the shins / calves right in between there, and that last half of a head just perfectly frames the top of the ankles and the bottom of the foot. It just nicely fits right in there. And those are the main landmarks. So chin, nipple, belly button, pubis, or bottom of the crotch. Then about 2/3 down the thighs, frame those kneecaps, and then the top of the ankles. Luckily the arms also have some nice proportions conveniently. So from the armpit to the elbow and elbow to the wrist is one head. Then the palm is about half of a head, and we just launch the fingers right off of that. And I just like to shade up from the bottoms of the limbs and kind of give it a slight volume, assuming there's top light. And those are my 7.5 head proportions with their landmarks. Rhythms I find to be the most important concept if you are going to draw the figure. It's a tool, and it shows you a pathway that's always there, and it might be invisible to someone who just isn't aware of it. And related to the flow of a river or the falling nature of a leaf. Say a river is going from north to south, it's going to churn and hit up against the side, but then start to push forward again and bounce back out. But a very fluid and smooth and balanced nature. Same with the leaf. We're going to build up that potential energy and then drop with kinetic, and then build back to potential and drop with kinetic. And you can see this in the limbs, especially from the top of the arm to the bottom of the arm, then from the tricep to the top of the forearm. There's a stagger, and that makes sure that that river of energy is flowing through the forearm. And especially with the leg. Next time you're at a beach or looking at someone in shorts, you'll see it from the thigh to the knee or thigh to the calf, and you can kind of pick your patterns. There's not one true pathway. It's a tool, so you can actually launch from one spot and go to several options, because as organic forms we grow fluidly as a single form. Like there's a connectivity between your fingertips and your forearm and your shoulder, which weaves into your chest. It's all connected. Some things to avoid is a segmented nature, because that just stops the communication between the limbs. That just really halts the flow of the energy. If I were to push on the side of this parallel parentheses, it would just topple over. Whereas if there's rhythm, there's a natural sway that keeps the person or organism standing up vertically. Before around 500 BC, Contrapposto wasn't really in artwork yet. Things were very stiff, and if you were to push on this figure, he'd fall over with that ping-pong absence of flow. Whereas when we get that staggered natural nature of the shoulders and the hips counterbalancing each other, there's a bit more movement. With our pose in particular, I'm seeing a gorgeous rhythm from the chest to the hips to the calf to the ankle. And that's usually my go-to for a standing pose. Again, from the chest to the hips to the calf to the ankle. And you can always find your own, but what happens is this invisible force of balance, and you see it in trees as well. If the tree leans a little too far to the right, it's going to counteract it with a branch or a bend. Peter Paul Rubens has some amazing examples of rhythm in his figure forms, and you can always just see this ensured flow throughout the body. It's a bit exaggerated, so that's why he's great to look at if you're ever at the museum and want to kind of chase some rhythms. But again, they're all over the figures in a naturalistic way. And feel free to pause and use your finger to become that river of flow using the alternating colors I put down. And this is the music that I've been talking about. This is the tempo of the body that encourages movement and a real natural balance to the human figure. The line of action is trying to get the force of a pose in a single line. And if we were absolutely forced to, if we had like half a second to get that pose down, no choice, I would just go for this slight angle tilt. And that's kind of simplified to the max. And that's around that where we're going to build the pose. If we want to add a bit more organic truth to it, I can follow the spine down and then launch into the straightness of those legs, how they kind of meet together. And upon that, I'm putting the counter tilt of the shoulders to the hips, which is called Contrapposto. And you can try standing up right now and try it out for yourself. It's something we naturally do when we stand and walk, because if we don't, if the shoulders tilt the same way as the hips, we're going to fall over. This is as simplistic as it gets. I'm just adding a little curvy nature to a stick figure, which I think gives a bit more organic data than a straight line figure. Dropping in the rib cage mass, and super simple. This would not lead to the main figure, but it's a great way of analyzing what we're viewing, and we get a bit of a stretch and a compression. Another thing to look for in the human figure when it's standing up. Simple to complex is how we engage really complicated material. We just want to start with some simple blocks or shapes, and then we slowly break that down, kind of like chipping a big rock into 2, then 4, then 8, on and on until we have just a really sandy beach, for example. And that's what we're doing here. Wherever limbs combine, I just stuck those 2 legs together into kind of that bean pod shape. The pelvic mass, I just did a big round circle. I'm not worried about the details. In this second pass, I'm starting to break those down a little bit further, as you can see, keeping it super simple, and I want that natural staggered movement to be inherent in every stage of the process. If I don't have that base part down at stage 10, for example, then I might have lost the meaning of the pose. And with each pass, I can add a little bit more detail wherever my focus takes me. I can sharpen some contrasting moments, suggest some value, depending on how much time I think I have left in the pose. And these that I'm adding right now, it's just a bit of value in the form of contour lines. And what contour lines are, these are lines that I think ideally can go laterally to the form, and you get more information on the direction that it's flowing. For example, we have a cylinder that's slowly tilting towards us, and I'm adding these contour lines to it, and this subtle change of curvature tells us a lot, doesn't it? It kind of really lets you know that it's tilting away from us or it's parallel to us. And that's the nature of contour lines, something really nice to add to any form to tell the viewer what's going on. So for gesture drawing, I thought it would be nice to share with you a first-person perspective of how I would engage a 30-second, 1-minute, and 5-minute pose. And with gesture drawing, it's really the essence of the pose. It's the inherent flow and poetry, the idea of the limbs and the body. It's not a fully rendered idea. It's just trying to capture that movement that if someone came into a room and glanced, they could tell what was going on with the body, and the quicker and the more fluid I can get that, the better the gesture, I believe. So for the 30-second, I can really feel the pressure because I'm on camera, but again, I'm just using that rhythm and flow to capture those big block shapes, trying to use your intuition to just react and follow those big angles. Don't worry about the tiny details just yet. We're going to see how far we can get, and dropping in a few contours, brief moments of contrast, and time is almost up. And quick drawing is a great way to work on your proportion because it's that tempo, that rhythm from the chest to the hips to the calf. They're each a different length of this music in the form, and if you can build up that sensitivity, you can really just get this underlying fluency in human proportion. So the 1 minute, I'm just taking it a little bit further, starting to get a little bit more contrast, awareness of those contours, and tiny bit refinement wherever my angles might have been off in the first passes. 5 minute, same beginning every time. And the reason that is because the spirit and soul of that pose really doesn't change. Even if I have more time, that curve of that right side contrasting the compression on the left side, it's the same, it's inherent. All I get with more time is a bit more refinement of my angles and my articulation, and perhaps how far into details I can get. And details are just a nice little cherry on top, but you can't get that until you really lock down the foundational nature and flow of the figure that you're dealing with. The block-in is perhaps the most challenging of exercises, but it really does work out your spatial foresight and awareness of the entire form, and this is called the envelope, which you can kind of picture like the rigid case for a violin perhaps, and within that we're going to lay down more organic form. But I'm using just straight lines because they tend to be much more objective. You can really hold your pencil up and check those angles, and you can really measure from shoulder to hip because those points are much more clear. And for each straight line I make, I break that down into 2 or 3, as you can see me doing, and it's just a much more effective way to stay accurate. And I'm just slowly letting almost the figure do the drawing for me. It's a bit less feeling, but a lot more measuring. And so with this approach, which can be viewed as more of an academic approach, can get you hyper accuracy. There's just a lot of measurements, and for each of these straight lines that meet, I can come in later and create a really accurate curve that's hyper aware of the nature of the form that we're looking at. And there may be a little less expressive emotion in these drawings, but it is absolutely meditative, because all I'm doing is really listening to the pose and letting it do all the talking. I am solely following her angles and her measurements, and any beauty and expression that comes from this is completely from the pose and completely from the human. So I highly recommend you try this, and you got nothing to lose. It's another tool in the toolkit, and I find this method of thinking really augments the more fluid style too. So it's good to try out both and be able to switch these gloves depending on whatever challenges you may encounter drawing from life or even still life. These are all highly useful approaches. Final thought I'll leave you with on figure drawing is just to remember to relax and add some playfulness to your learning experience. That if you only look through one rigid window, you're never going to really learn to see through the figure, and also to bend it to how you learn best and to how you experience life and creativity through imagination. And it's really fun to just kind of be playful and kind of reinterpret these forms a million different ways. Treat the pose and the loose proportions as the prompt or the main ingredient, and then what you create with that and how you interpret those ingredients or use that prompt to make your own poetry is really where art comes to the full force potential and pushes the individual to kind of make their own interpretation of that. So I hope that using a blend of the techniques I showed you, use them to how they work best for you, and then also take breaks and do little doodles, as I'm doing, kind of based on those movements. And just remembering that if it's your personal experience, then there really are no wrong answers. As long as you're just aware, staying open, and focused on kind of taking in these externals, then you're growing. That's why having a sketchbook is really important, and it allows you to develop your own voice. Alright, thank you so much for checking out this course, and I really hope I gave you something to think about, something to simmer upon and bring into your own work, be it the rhythms or proportions, and finding a way to see the music that's inherent in nature and adding that to your own artwork and life itself as always. So again, thank you so much for watching. I'm Cameron McCool, and I'll see you next time.